what's happening nationally and internationally too. And thank you very much for being with us. Now, the leader of Hartlepool Council is calling for an internal investigation after claims a council received more than £60,000 in undeclared allowances. Now, BBC Tees has learned Labour's Carl Richardson, who was the chair of the council between 2002 and 2012, was paid the cash over a 10-year period. He says he received the money because he was the town ceremonial mayor, and the council says the allowance was signed off in the proper manner. Well, Lee Johnson has the story, and he joined me in the studio a little earlier.
Carl Richardson has been a Labour councillor in the town for well over 30 years, and for 10 years between 2002 and 2012 he was the chairman of the council. Now, that was under the old system with Stuart Drummond as the town's elected mayor, and back then, as he does now, Councillor Richardson received a basic allowance which all councillors get to help them carry out their duties, and during that 10-year period he also received a special responsibility allowance, and that was because he was the chairman of the council. However, we were passed details of a third allowance, a ceremonial mayor allowance. Now, those figures show that in 2002, Councillor Richardson received an extra £5,500, and by 2012, when it was scrapped, it had risen to just over £7,000. Now, each year, that allowance was consistently more than both his basic allowance and his special responsibility allowance, and in total, he received £61,142 and 10 pence over those 10 years. Now, the leader of the council, fellow Labour councillor Christopher Akers-Belcher, told me he's looked into this and it raises serious questions.
I find it quite immoral that additional payments were made, and it's quite covert in the way that it was paid. Councillor Richardson certainly hasn't done anything that people would say was legally incorrect, but from a Labour perspective, it doesn't sit comfortably that someone is afforded additional allowances and then, the other councillors on the council are completely unaware.
Now, the leader of the Labour group says this third allowance wasn't declared and another member didn't know anything about it. What does Councillor Richardson say about this?
Well, we've asked him, Gary, and this was his response.
That was to carry over from the mayoral system. What happened when I was the chairman of the council, I was like the ceremonial mayor. So I went to different functions just like the ordinary mayor would go to now. The only difference between the chairman of the council at the time and the mayor was I didn't wear a gown. I wore the chains and did everything else what a normal mayor would do because we had an elected mayor at the time. But the council decided that they would have the chairman would be like the ceremonial mayor, and he would do everything what the ceremonial mayor would do today.
Now, we asked the council for the decision record on that, and it couldn't provide it, and instead it sent us the minutes from that meeting. Now, those minutes don't actually explain why he received that payment, but they do say that if a member has two or more positions of special responsibility, they can only claim one special payment. So we went back to the council and we asked for more details, and it said that the additional chairman's allowance was a long-standing allowance paid to the ceremonial mayor of the council, and the arrangement for that was approved by a council committee in 1998. So we asked for evidence of that as well, and we received a report that shows there was in fact a mayoral allowance, and that year it was £5,370. However, the council says that report was never published because it says it contained personal information. So that may go part of the way to explaining why this payment wasn't common knowledge as we're hearing amongst other councillors. But it also raises questions about transparency at the time and why there is no record of a decision being made about it.
Now, to be clear, the council's constitution has strict rules on allowances, doesn't it?
It does, and this raises another question, in fact, because when does an allowance for an extra role become a special allowance? Now, the council's constitution hasn't shifted on this. In 2004, it said that no more than one special responsibility allowance can be claimed by any one member, and that is still the case today. But Councillor Richardson was receiving two extra allowances. Now, one of those wasn't formally labelled a special allowance, but Councillor Richardson was claiming thousands of pounds for doing an additional job, which, as we've heard, the Labour leader is being highly critical of. Now, it's also worth noting here that Councillor Richardson was the chair of the Constitution Committee during part of that period as well.
So the big question is, what happens next, Lee?
Well, the leader of the council says he's asked the council's Director of Finance and Policy to look into how this happened. He wants an internal investigation, basically, and crucially, to try and establish who signed off on the money. But as we've heard from Carl and as we've heard from the council, it was signed off by the committee. But I understand this matter could also be referred to the council's audit committee as well. He's asking one simple question. Why was a councillor receiving 2 allowances for effectively doing one job? Now, it's important to emphasise here that neither the council nor Councillor Richardson have done anything illegal here. There's no question of that. But as we've heard from the leader, there are questions about why councillors were in the dark over this cash and what ultimately constitutes as a special allowance.
Lee, thank you very much.